It's with a deep sense of gratitude and admiration that I introduce Dr. Shirley Malcom, who is Senior Advisor and Director of the Sea Change Initiative at the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She has worked at the AAAS for over 40 years, working to improve the quality and increase access to education and careers in STEM, as well as to enhance public science literacy. Dr. Malcom's scientific expertise is in the biological sciences. She received her bachelor's with distinction in zoology from the University of Washington, her master's in zoology from UCLA, and her PhD in ecology from Penn State. She has worked as a high school science teacher and a university faculty member. Dr. Malcom is a former member of the National Science Board, the policymaking body of the US National Science Foundation, and served on President Clinton's Committee of Advisors on Science and Technology. She serves on numerous boards and in 2003 received the Public Welfare Medal of the US National Academy of Sciences, the highest award given by the Academy. And in addition to all of her service, talents, and accolades, she also knows how much mathematicians enjoy a good pun. The title of her talk is Real Analysis: Why Isn't There More Diversity in Mathematics Graduate Education? Let us welcome Dr. Malcom to our conference today with some silent applause.
Thank you, Justin. I had to unmute myself. And for those of you, I have had some instability on my site. And so if I disappear, don't worry, I will be back. But during that period, you can put in the chat a question that has arisen because of something that I might have said. So that's a good way to spend the time. So I did, in fact, I love a pun too. And so this is kind of punny of me, but the question is a real one. And it is something that, that Justin asked me to talk about. And so I decided that I want to have this conversation with you. So the first question, I think, is how do I get my slide to advance? Okay, there. So let's try to figure out what the state of play is. Just how bad are the numbers? I did it this way because you cannot believe how bad the numbers are, so that I wanted to at least not shock you as we go into them. So I asked my daughter to do these slides for me because I am just not as facile with the data sets that you have to use in order to construct these graphics. And so you have this today because of Dr. Lindsay Malcom-Puku, Assistant Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Assessment at Caltech. And so I just want to start off by acknowledging Lindsay. So I asked her to give me the master's numbers because I figured that if there was any progress to be seen, that we might see it here first. Let me begin by saying there's not a lot of progress. If you can look at the legend, what you will find is that the numbers have increased. This is just the numbers have increased. The numbers have increased. But the two numbers that have risen there are international men and international women. And underneath it, the purple line is for white males, okay? And the deeper purple line is for white females. And everybody else is kind of hanging down there on the bottom. So I think I went one too far. Okay. So because everybody else is hanging down there at the bottom, you really can't see the numbers. They all kind of mesh together. And so I asked if she would kind of break them out in such a way that we could see more detail. So there we see the lighter green, Asian males, the darker green, Asian females, Asian American females, and then that's Latinx males, is next. And then after that, it's Latinas, the deeper orange. And then the next blue, the light blue, is Black men, and the darker blue is Black women. And the numbers at the bottom are American Indian and Alaska Native. I think that you kind of get the drift here, that everything is not changing. For some groups it is. We see more Latinas, and the trend is upward, but for other groups, it's not happening, okay? So here we have the share of degrees, and as you would expect, that's showing the same kind of things. But one of the things that you might find interesting is the fact that back in 1975, this looked totally different. And that it was only with the influx of more international students that we actually had the kind of shift with regard to the shares. This is way too busy. And the reason it is obviously busy is that you're dealing with small numbers. But I think that what you want to look at is over here in the kind of 2010 to current day range, and that you see for both Black men and Black women that the trends are downward. So again, the pulling out the international students so that you get a kind of a clearer picture of what is going on with regard to the domestic students. And then again, showing you more detail in the minoritized populations so that you can kind of get a sense, again, that things are not getting better, and that they are just kind of seem to be heading in the wrong direction. All right. So then we have the doctoral numbers, and same kind of pattern, international students, and that's a fairly recent phenomenon that started in the late 80s. And that then white males, international women, white females, and then everybody else. And you may wonder about this big peak in the 1990s. This was not when suddenly everybody went to school. This was an issue of people being reclassified at a time when a lot of the students who were in the States from China, and and because of political reasons, they became permanent residents, and so they are counted differently because of that. And then PhDs, again, the share of PhDs, again, the numbers for just the minoritized populations, and again, that big peak that you see for Asian males, Asian American males, because of the change in the visa status and the classification of those individuals. And then again, the share of just domestic students, as you can see here. And then the minoritized populations pulled out so that you can get a little bit more details. One of the things that you should know is that these numbers down in the bottom here, they're like less than 20 in some cases, so that you can have. Now, I gave you all the data, all right, and I started out there. And so I want you to just hold those numbers and hold those patterns in your mind. Now I want to start with the story. The story of Lonnie Cross. And if you want more details about this particular story, the mathematics MAA has a detailed story about him on their site, and I recommend that you look at it. He was born in 1927 in Bessemer, Alabama. Bessemer is only it's less than 20 miles from Birmingham, which is where I was born. Though not in 1927, instead in 1946. But like in my case, we went to segregated schools. The Southeast was totally segregated because of Jim Crow laws. And we did have good teachers, and that was the case in my school as well, because there weren't a lot of opportunities for educated and smart Black men and Black women to do much besides things like serve the Black community as social workers or nurses or teachers or what have you. So my teachers, my math teachers, had degrees in mathematics. This was a time when there was some advantage to segregation in that you had very strong programs within, very strong teachers within programs that were under-resourced. Now, Lonnie Cross moved to DC at 14. There was an incident that is recounted in his story about some bad interactions with whites. I mean, Bessemer was not the most progressive place, trust me. And he moved to stay with his grandmother, and he attended junior high school and high school in DC. And for those of you who don't know this story, Dunbar High School at the time was like a really premier high school for Blacks. All of this was segregated, but they had PhDs teaching at this school. It was like a very progressive and whatever it was, you know, the best students went to Dunbar and graduated from Dunbar. He graduated with honors in 1945 and entered Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Lincoln University is an HBCU, and there are actually two Lincolns. One is in Pennsylvania and one is in Missouri, and both of them are historically Black colleges and universities. Graduated in 1949. And the thing that was amazing is he majored in chemistry and mathematics with minors in French and physics. And I'm like, how much abuse does he want to do with himself? But in any case, he was very kind of all over the place. In terms of his interest and his intellectual pursuits. He received his master's in mathematics from MIT in 1951. And with a minor in philosophy. And he received his PhD in mathematical analysis from Cornell. Partly to pay his way, I guess. He worked in industry during some of those years. And while he was at Cornell, he also did some teaching stints. But when he graduated from Cornell, well, actually a little bit before he finished, or in this transition point, he went to Tuskegee to teach at Tuskegee Institute, and another historically Black university. And then he moved the following year to Clark College, which is now Clark Atlanta University, another HBCU, as an associate professor of mathematics, where he remained until 1963. Now, when he went, this is in the history of Lonnie Cross. When he went to Atlanta University, the school had only 2 graduate students in mathematics. Atlanta University was in fact the graduate part of the Atlanta University Center. They had other institutions within the center, including Clark College, Morehouse, Spelman, and Morris Brown. But Atlanta University was the graduate portion. But he made a mark immediately. There were only 2 when he got there. By the end of the year, there were 8. And when he left Atlanta University in 63, Atlanta University had graduated 109 students with master's degrees in mathematics. Now, the reason that this is so incredible is that in the entire period of time, like there's a 10-year window between, for example, 75 and 85, there were only 100 PhDs awarded to Blacks in a 10-year period. And in a fairly short period of time, you had one guy who was able to move these students. He had supervised himself 78 completed master's theses, and more than 30% of his students went on to get doctoral degrees in either mathematics or mathematics education. That is unusual. If you think about the time, it was just not, sorry about that. In the 1960s, when the protests started, there were a lot of college students that were actually involved in sit-ins and so on. And he was accused of encouraging his students to participate in the protest and called a communist. And eventually he and the president of the institution kind of fell out. So he had to leave.
Excuse me, Shirley, can you please reshare your slides?
Yes, sorry about that. Have to reset everything. Okay. So he was accused of being a communist and all kinds of things, and he had to leave. So it was not a happy time. But he stayed active in education. He became like one of the major leading lights in education for the Nation of Islam, and he spent time teaching internationally as well, including going to Mecca and spending time in Saudi Arabia. So the thing is that his life was basically framed around the two things that my life was framed around, and that is the civil rights movement and Sputnik. When the U.S., when Sputnik came along in the late 1950s, 1957, it was a time when there was a lot of interest and focus on science education and mathematics education and engineering and what have you. And he got all involved in that and tried to push his students in that direction. This is a picture that I use for myself. I don't recall if I had used it for Professor Shabazz, I probably would have put lunch counters in. But in my case, this was my mother and grandmother's church that was bombed. So it was a time of turmoil, but he was basically, that bracketed his life. So he began teaching at Clark Atlanta University again. And the thing that was very interesting is that by that time, Clark College at Atlanta University had merged and it had new leadership, and he felt that he could actually make a contribution there. So he served as chair from 1990 to 1995, but he had been there since '86. But when he got there, things had gotten so bad that there was this huge focus on remediation, and no one had received a bachelor's degree in mathematics, and there was only one master's degree that was awarded. But he turned things around. And so during the time he was the chair of the Department of Mathematical Sciences, 77 bachelor's or degrees and 45 master's degrees were awarded. But it lets you know that this really was his impact. When he went to teach at Lincoln, Lincoln's numbers changed. When he went to toward the end of his life, when he went to teach at Grambling, Grambling's numbers changed. So there was something about the kind of transformation that Dr. Shabazz, Professor Shabazz, had done that really was important. Now, you may wonder why I wanted to start with the story of Professor Shabazz. But it is important because it shows you how kind of an impact can kind of ripple through not only his personal impact as a mentor, but also the kind of ripple impact. He received the AAAS award for lifetime mentoring in 1992. The award was given the first time in 1991. And Dr. Shabazz received this. It recognized people whose work had contributed to the production of PhDs within whatever field they happen to be in. It was not just for mathematicians, it was for whomever's field. But the nomination that came in basically says that in 1992, 100 of the African-American holders of doctoral degrees in mathematics could trace their academic lineage to Dr. Shabazz or to his students, which is really amazing when you think about how small the numbers are, period. So the award was given at the annual meeting in Boston in 1993. And it so happened in February of 1993, and it so happened that that year, Jack Gibbons, President Clinton's science advisor, was receiving the Philip Haig Abelson Prize from AAAS. And this was fun for me because I did that. Professor Shabazz meet Jack Gibbons. I was able to introduce them, and the conversation that started that I kept listening to, he was so amazed that this one man could in fact have that kind of impact on the numbers of students that were produced. And when Jack went back and was looking at programs that he could start and things like this, as science advisor, as the head of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, he established the Presidential Awards for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering Mentoring. And those awards have continued to this day to recognize people, but in their case, with the White House Awards, all levels, all fields, not only to individuals, but also to organizations. Now, there have been, since the initial time of the Mentor Award, there have been a lot of mathematicians who've received the award. And they did different things they received it for different things, but all because they were basically trying to push people into the pipeline toward doctoral degrees. There are names that you will recognize there. The asterisks are for the Mentor Award, the Lifetime Mentor Award. There were so many people that really needed that kind of recognition that we decided to split the awards off and taking people who were younger, but really pushing people out and on a good trajectory, and people who had done a lifetime worth of that kind of mentoring as it stood. And so you will see a lot of different people here. I want to point out two friends of mine. I have a lot of friends on this list, but I want to point out Eder Zuber-Falconer and Sylvia Bozeman. They were at Spelman College. And if you want to look at like Black women PhDs in mathematics, Spelman is overrepresented. And so this is to talk about even small institutions. They were baccalaureate origins. Small institutions can be baccalaureate origin institutions for people who go on to get their PhDs. I do want to highlight a friend of mine, Richard Tapia. And Richard's the numbers of students that Richard has mentored and encouraged has been phenomenal. He personally, in terms of students, and not just in mathematics, but increasingly in computational sciences and in other areas. And his role at Rice, 60 or more students that he has supported their work. Now, I want to just mention an important idea, and this is the baccalaureate origins data. Even though Blacks, 15% of Blacks who received a bachelor's degree in 2016 did so from an HBCU, 25% of the graduates who earned a doctorate degree between 2013 and 2017 received bachelor's degrees from an HBCU, and almost 35% of those in mathematics and statistics PhDs received their bachelor's from HBCUs. Similarly, high Hispanic enrollment institutions have had this kind of outsized role in terms of producing the numbers. After the George Floyd, and I guess America's reckoning on race, my friend, editor-in-chief Holden Thorpe, did an editorial that essentially says it's time to look in the mirror. We have problems that they look like low numbers, they look like small levels of participation, but it's really, we've got problems with regard to how we address issues of race in this country. And I think that that's a fair statement. And it is time to really think about how do we go about this. This was an article that was carried in Science that talks about the issue of whether we are driven by a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And I think that what you should look at up at the top is, that's graph A, the percentage of US PhDs who are African American and the fields in which they received their degrees. One of the lowest levels and one of the ones that is furthest out on the fixed mindset issue is mathematics, along with philosophy. This idea that you either have it or you don't, that this is innate ability that is basically driving this. It is nothing about developing talent, but this is a culture point, and I want us to hold on to this culture point. And then this essentially, this is the graph at the top for women. Notice anything? For those fields that are less likely to be focused on a growth mind, that are less likely to have a growth mindset, they have lower levels of participation of women and minorities. So there's something about the culture here that I think that we really should look at. So the question that I look at, and this is knowing these people, what do successful mentors and departments understand? They understand the importance of community. I think that is a major piece. They understand the role of expectations, that in fact, if you don't expect anything from somebody, you're not going to get them to perform at their highest levels. They understand the role of support and affirmation. They understand this notion of a growth mindset, that smart is what you become. It's not necessarily what you enter being. There is the availability of role models. There is rigor. You don't, and I think that Professor Shabazz basically demonstrated that remediation doesn't pull you up. Essentially, it's rigor and challenge that basically gets people through. And the sense of mathematics identity, he had basically gotten a large enough group of students together and was able to cohort them, to have them think about being in a place together, being a mathematician and identifying as such. This past summer, I did this article for Scientific American to talk about reimagining colleges and universities. And I want us to think about too, about the issue of reimagining departments, about how you make more, how would you go about making a department more equitable? Well, one of the things that you basically have to do is you got to figure out where you are. You can't get to some place if you don't know where you are. And so the question is, what are your policies and practices, and what difference do they make to different kinds of populations? Are they working well for everyone? Where is it that I want to go? And what's the difference between where I am and where I want to go? I am beginning to bring you into what I call this is the process that you use for sea change, STEM equity achievement. And I do think that this notion about figuring out where you are, using the evidence to try to determine what your current position is, to reflect on what you find, and to think about the different kinds of impact that would have on different groups, and then to talk about how you could move from where you are to where you want to be. What does it mean that you change? How do you go about this? We've had a lot of programs over the years to try to move the numbers, but they have tended to be isolated. They have tended to focus on fixing the individuals, not the system. Make the student stronger, make the student whatever. They have not, in fact, interrogated the department or the unit or the system or what have you, of which these people are asked to become a part of this other system. And that's one of the reasons that we began our work on sea change, which is a much more systemically driven process to look at and offer a scaffold for how to think about one's department or one's institution, to try to figure out what kinds of changes might be needed in order to get different outcomes. So what we're trying to do is recognize that we need a shift in culture. And I think that there may be a similar kind of a reckoning within the mathematics community about the need for a shift in culture. And that is one of the reasons that we have stood up this program, Sea Change. We have an institute. We do not think that people readily understand the research that informs whatever their program practices might happen to be. So we bring the research in, we make courses available to people to try to increase the capacity of the department or the institution with whom we work. But at the core of systemic transformation is that we need both top-down and bottom-up approaches. Now, in our case, Sea Change has these three pieces. It has an institute that builds capacity. It has a community that helps people come together and share knowledge. And we have an award structure. AAAS provides the institutional awards, where institutions come in with applications and with plans about how they're going to move themselves. And we need a bottom-up approach, which is a departmental level award. We are fortunate to be able to work with our colleagues. Abby is somewhere out there in this group, and we work with her and her colleagues in terms of trying to develop a framework for mathematics. What would this look like in terms of changing a department? What kinds of questions should a department ask of themselves if in fact that they wanted to become a more welcome and inclusive place? What policies might they change? What programs, what practices, what procedures, what traditions? Because only through top-down, bottom-up approaches are you really going to move major systems. You think about the fact these universities have been and departments have been the way that they are forever. And quite frankly, the idea that there are probably some of the departments that are out there that are graduate departments that have never had a student of color who received a graduate degree. And so how do they start? Where do they start? How do we even think about it? And so I think that these kinds of strategies that we have been undertaking, that they hold considerable promise to be able to move the numbers. The awards process is such that you start with a bronze, and then you can move up to higher levels. This is modeled on the Athena Swan program in the UK that started focusing on gender equity, but in our case, we look both at gender as well as race, ethnicity. You get an award if you do a thorough assessment and develop an action plan, get a bronze. But it's only good for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, you have to come back and re-up for your bronze, or if you've made a lot of progress, go to silver. The reason that we did it this way is that we're trying to reinforce the idea of continuous improvement. We're trying to help re-examine kind of continue to look, to try things out, see if they work. What kind of results do we have? And eventually, I hope that all of maths departments, graduate degree granting departments, are gold. Because at that point, it would be a matter not only of being a welcoming place for students of color, but I think it would be a welcoming place for everyone. That is the thing, that there are serious issues in graduate education today. The academy has done reports, everybody studies it, but my issue is that I can't study this stuff anymore. It's time to do something about it. And I think that a lot of us are in the let's stop studying and start doing mode. And this is where I am. And I think that I have come in right on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malcom. All right. So we'll get started with some questions here. So maybe a first thing, as folks get over into the Slido and add some questions there. There was a question in the chat. Can you say, Sam, about the relationship between how a department moves through the Sea Change Awards compared to the university as a whole?
Right now, we have the institutional program. That's in play. There are already institutions that are members. They're not going through the awards process, most of them yet, but by being members, they're able to get coaching. They're able to get the capacity building part in order so that they can start with the applications piece. We are not. We are just in the early days on the disciplinary side. You should know that the first ones out of the gate in terms of doing the pilot at the departmental level are the physicists and the astronomers, who also have issues. Their numbers are bad too. Mathematics, we have, I think, a really good, firm collaboration going on with mathematics. As I indicated, talk to Abby, because she's working through the framework building process. And then after that, we've got to figure out, she's got to figure out, the community has to figure out who might be steering the pilot process, because you got to try these things out. You can't just stand them up without trying them out.
Right. Could you maybe talk a little bit about, you've had your eyes on all of the sciences for the past 40 plus years, and their own individual challenges in trying to promote diversity. Can you say something about what aspects of mathematics, are there challenges that are specific to mathematics?
I think that there are challenges that are specific to mathematics, and I think that one of them is this culture issue. Because if you really believe that you you either have it or you don't, then you will expect it to show up early. You will not give any, you won't countenance any, you won't give any slack to the idea that you might have come out of bad schools, but you could be smart. So there's no, it's kind of like, if you start off wrong, you never get back on path. There's been, for example, a major focus on remediation, but remediation is like saying the same thing over and over again, louder, and expecting people to somehow get it, even though they hear well. Their problem is not hearing. The problem is really the way that the teaching is actually taking place, or even determining where the students are. Contrast that with the fact, if you think about the students that Dr. Shabazz was dealing with, These were students who had come out of programs by that time. The schools were so-called quote unquote integrated, but they weren't. All right. What had happened in the case of Birmingham, when Birmingham decided to integrate, I never went to school with anyone who wasn't Black until I went to college. Okay. Even though Brown versus Board of Education, that law was passed in 1954. I graduated from high school in 1963. Never, okay? Never, ever. So when Birmingham's version of integration was that it would integrate the teaching core rather than the students, and they took the best Black teachers and sent them to the white schools, and took some of the teachers who had less seniority and less identity and connection to the community and sent them into the Black schools. And so all of a sudden, that teaching that Dr. Shabazz had, that I had, it went bye-bye. So, but you think about the fact that he was able to take those students and move them no matter what. And that is what a lot of the HBCUs and what have you do. They essentially, wherever you show up, whatever you bring, that's where we start. We now have a lot of students who start in two-year colleges. And there's just not this thought that a two-year college student, somebody comes out of two-year college, is necessarily going to end up as a mathematician. But Richard Tapia did. Richard started at two-year, and he was recognized by his faculty as having what it would take, and they urged him to go to transfer over to UCLA. I mean, and there are just all kinds of things, all kinds of beliefs that stand in the way of moving. And that is why you've got to understand the pathways and the issues that keep people from being successful in order to know what it is that you got to move within these departments, not just the attitudes, because I can't change your hearts and minds, but we can change behavior. And so that is, I think, a major piece to talk about how we might make these kinds of adjustments.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a follow-up question over here in the chat in the Slido about what kinds of steps can departments take to get rid of, or to get rid of this fixed mindset associated with math? What are ways in which they can stop, saying, oh, well, you're not good enough, either at the admission stage or once they've let people in?
It's really hard, but they have a chance right now in a lot of cases. Departments have had to abandon use of the GRE because of COVID. They just can't, whatever. So the question is, who are they taking now without the GRE scores to inform what the GRE scores inform them on, which is a number, but not necessarily mathematical thinking, not necessarily the kinds of things that they really value. And so I think that there needs to be at least some interrogation of, does my class look different? Does the applicant pool look different? What kinds of things are the students saying about themselves? And really kind of do the research to see if it can make a difference. Sometimes engaging with students at a younger level, and especially in like out of school programs or things like this, summer programs, can help people begin to shift their mind about what students do and don't understand, what they know and don't know, what they can know, where they're capable of going, as opposed to where they've been. That's the issue. Where you've been, you can't control where you've been. You're born into a community. You're born into a family. But where you can go, that is something that a good education can help totally transform.
Yeah.
I saw a note in the chat that's assuming that departments want to change. You're absolutely right. Some of them don't want to change. But what has to happen is that they have to pay a price for not wanting to change. And that's one of the things that I think that I tried to get at when I served on the National Science Board. When I served on the National Science Board, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the criteria for award of proposal. There is something called broader impacts. Guess how it got there? You know, you're getting money from the federal government. Why shouldn't you be asked to do more than sit in your office? I mean, this is, come on, people. I think that this notion of trying to move the incentives so that they all align, and that if you want this big center, you're not going to get it unless you have made outreach to HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, unless you have actually reached out and diversified the staffing and the whatever it is. I mean, the thing is that we've got to align the incentive structures. The other thing is that I am hoping that when mathematics stands up the math version of sea change, that people will look to see if a department has an award before they choose to go there as a student, or before they choose to hire on as a faculty member, or a bid donor before they choose to give money. We've got to change the incentive structure.
Yeah, I think this is something that's really a challenge for students who are applying to graduate school, in my experience, of just sort of distinguishing amongst programs, where if you think the thing that you're getting is roughly the same in all of them in terms of what your experience will be, you're taking some courses, you have to write a dissertation, and you're not able to, if the things that places are bragging about are, we have these great placements at the end, if those are really only coming from the fact that you're getting good people coming in, well, of course they're going to do great things going out, but you're not highlighting, you know, the transformation.
Yes, what is it like while you are there?
Right, it's hard. It's places tend.
And you know, one of the things that I was just going to say, one of the things that when I look at the critique of graduate education overall, a lot of it relates to the fact that the place is not necessarily good for your mental health. I mean, there are lots of things that you can think about. Graduate school was hard. Hard is fine. I don't mind hard. I do mind feeling like I was harassed. That's a totally different issue. Okay.
Yeah. Let me ask this question. It's anonymous in the Slido. So do you have any advice for people, faculty members or graduate students who are inside of departments where people say that they want some kind of progress, right? Some kind of inclusion, diversity, what have you. And then there's what they're willing to do in order to promote those values, but those don't match, right? So people are talking the talk, but they're not really walking the walk.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of that out there.
Right.
Okay.
So what are ways of dislodging that?
One of the things that I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful about Sea Change Math because it gives you a different rating structure. Right now, as you say, one department looks like another department, looks like another department, looks like another department. But if you are in the math department at one institution and your peer institution down the road has an award for doing the right thing, what we want is for that to affect, wait a minute, they're getting more students. We tried to get that student, but they wanted to go down the road. Okay. It's going to take a long time. I have no secret sauce to give you, no recipe for secret sauce. It's going to take a long time, but it took a long time to get to this place. And so the thing is, it's going to take a while to get out of this place. And I do think that we need to use the same structures that are commonly used. Peer competition, friendly competition among peers for the best students, the best grants, the best faculty, the best visitors, that donor, that industry connection. And that's one of the things too. And that is that I hope that industry and other givers of benefits will start to look at these issues when they make a decision about where they're going to give them out. That'll change things too.
So there's another question that's been upvoted a lot in the Slido. I'm going to rephrase it a little since it's anonymous, or not since it's anonymous. I just want to rephrase it. When you look at the landscape, say of math graduate programs generally, the folks in this room right now, their heads on a swivel. They're ready to look for some leadership or some good models or something to emulate, right? What do you see out there that we should be modeling ourselves after, or like looking to for the way forward?
Well, I mean, I look at centers like Richard has stood up. I look at programs, for example, in computer science that Juan Gilbert has put in place. The major point is that we have had to work off of programs for so long. They're not sustainable. You're always having to go out and get additional soft money or whatever. The hard dollars ought to be doing the right thing. That's my point. And I think that we're going to get to the point where we start calling out places. Why? If somebody says, well, such and such a program, and you say, I don't know if you want to go there. They have never graduated anybody in such and such. I mean, I think that to a certain extent, we are kind of like True Confessions. I mean, basically to out some of the fact that some of these departments are like roach motels. They check in, but they don't check out. I mean, this is like, there's really a need to become quite honest. I saw somebody in the chat who said that, maybe bronze awardees hide it better. You can hide it the first time, you can't hide it the second time, because you got to show us the change. And I think that is, show me the delta. I think that being able to know that you've got to come back through this process, it might lead you at first to want to do some sleight of hand, but it's going to be embarrassing when you lose your award. So let's try to do shame. I'm into shame. Let's try to do incentives. I'm into incentives, but everybody wants carrots and nobody wants sticks. And so I think that we need to try to think about how do we call out some of these places where you should not, like, what is it, war? I don't know, but this back in the days when I was young, there was this thing, war is not good for children and other living things. I mean, the thing is that some of these departments are not good for children and for graduate students and other living things. And we need to say it. We need to say it. We can't keep going on this way. You saw those graphs. They are flat for Blacks. They are rising a bit for Latinx students, but not fast enough, not comparable to their presence within the population. We cannot keep going this way.
Yeah, let me ask just one last question before we put a pause in it, which is picking up on something you were saying just a moment ago about shaming folks or shaming departments or using some sticks in addition to carrots. So there's a question from Dwight Williams. To combat this idea that non-awarded institutions are safe, can we have some kind of negative bronze, silver, gold awards like gum wrapper, shrapnel, loose nails?
Well, I can't do that, but you guys could.
Right? Can you?
You give Yelp ratings all over the place for everything else. I mean,
yeah. Okay. Can you maybe speak to like what are the like institutional challenges to, or structural challenges to having sort of these are the bad, these are places that are not doing as well as they need to have that knowledge be public and not hidden. That seems like a hard thing to do. To just,
it is.
A whisper network can save a few people, but it's not going to be enough to save everyone who needs to be saved from those places.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And it is, it's very difficult because there are going to be people who want to know what basis do you say this? And if you have the data speak for themselves. You don't even have to say this is not a good place. You just, all you had to do is say, is it true that in the such and such a history of your department that you have never graduated at such and such and such and such?
Right.
And it is either true or it's not true. Okay, that's a binary. It is or it ain't. And I think that accountability, we're asking for accountability in every aspect of our lives. We want police accountability. We want health systems accountability. And we better ask for that in all parts of our lives. But the point is that we have not really asked the hard questions of our higher ed institutions. And there's still a tremendous amount of hypocrisy in saying that we want these things, but we don't incentivize them. We basically reward people who get the grants, who get the publications. We don't necessarily recognize the people who are graduating these students. And they often pay, they carry this tax, this additional tax of wanting to make a difference and what have you. But that doesn't necessarily get seen as professional work. Is there a mentor award within AMS? I don't know. I don't know. Could there be? Is there a support for a kind of a planning assessment system within the National Science Foundation MPS Directorate? I don't know. But could there be? And I think that this notion of could there be is the thing that we've got to think about. I met John Lewis in 2018 when he spoke at the Caltech commencement. My first question was, how in the world did Caltech get John Lewis to come here? And I found out it was the 60th anniversary of Martin Luther King's visit to Caltech. And so John felt very honored by being asked to come at the 60th anniversary. And so I had asked how to get John Lewis. And I overheard somebody ask, why did they want John Lewis? And I'm thinking, are these people crazy? But his message was that those of us in the STEM fields, that we have a responsibility as well. Academic citizenship. We have a responsibility. The science has a responsibility. Mathematics, all these fields, we have a responsibility. And that we've got to call out things when they're not quite right. And he talks about getting in good trouble. I guess that's what I would challenge all of you. Get in good trouble. If you're gonna get in trouble, get in good trouble. Get in trouble making a difference. So
yeah, let's thank Dr. Malcom again, and we'll yeah. And we're gonna pause here. She and I will take just a short break, and we're gonna make some breakout rooms, and then we'll be heading over to breakout room 1 in just a moment, to keep chatting some for a little while. Thanks, everybody.